Hello, I'm Rebecca, the founder of triiyo. triiyo uses technology to enable organisations to prioritise the employee experience during every work-life transition that occurs in the workplace. And welcome to PEP Talks with triiyo, where our expert partners share advice and discuss the workplace transitions that matter to you. Keep listening as we connect the dots between what's happening in life and work, because guess what? Life happens at work. And in today's PEP Talk with triiyo, we're joined with our expert partner, Martine Beaumont, co-founder at Select Wellness. Hello, Martine.
Hello.
Lovely to have you here.
Lovely to be here.
Could you tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do at Select Wellness?
Will do. So I've been in private practice as a counsellor and a psychotherapist for over 25 years, but I also am co-founder of Select Wellness. And in that business, we work with a diverse range of organisations supporting all their employees and their leaders around their mental and physical well-being. So we've done that for around about 8-9 years now.
Wow, very established. And you must have seen, I'm guessing, from the sort of the last 2 years to the 6 or 7 years prior to that, what's been one of the biggest changes and shifts in both physical and or mental wellness?
I think there's definitely been an increase in burnout, but it's not only increase in burnout, it's the severity. So there was an article 4 months ago in the Sydney Morning Herald where they said that 1 in 5 employees who were resigning from their workplace were doing it because they were suffering from extreme burnout. So it seems like burnout isn't even sufficient enough a word to describe what we're all feeling right now. It's now got to be
extreme. And what sort of classifies extreme burnout, and why are we at extreme burnout when actually some people would say we have, we're working from home, it's easier, we don't have to do the commute, we're with our families, is this
there are pros and cons to that? Yeah, I think there's very much pros and cons to all of that. I think there's been like a perfect storm. If you think of a perfect storm that's contributed to this increase in the intensity of burnout and the prevalence. So look at societal influences. We've been exposed to COVID, bushfires, flood, COVID, again, that all feeds uncertainty and powerlessness. We're also living in a 24/7 digital world where we actually work on screens and we rest on screens, and that definitely has an impact on burnout and burnout prevention. There has been an escalation in mental illness. So, if it's not us who's suffering from mental illness, it's the people around us, and particularly leaders at work are being called on to support people more emotionally. So that really takes a toll as well. Then you've got your workplace influences. So there's actually been a rise in sort of below the line or toxic workplace behaviours, in part as a result of all the Zoom culture. So when you're on Zoom, often people sort of, instead of looking at the non-verbals to check that everything's okay, they presume the worst and they make up that someone doesn't like them or they've done the wrong thing and then that sort of feeds. And so you're dealing with a lot more sort of self-doubt and all that ruminating and questioning whether you're doing a good job. Zoom itself, virtual itself eats up 30% more glucose in the brain. So, even that alone.
And what would that do to us?
Well, that means where it's sucking our glucose, it's sucking out, and then
exhaustion.
Yeah, it's exhaustion. Wow. So that's why the level of exhaustion is far more. We're dealing with staffing and skill shortages. And then, the definition of stress is balancing kids and work at the same time.
When you're sat at home, that's just not possible a lot of the time.
So there also might be stuff happening in your life. It might be the nature of your role. If you are someone who's working in a people team, so we've found that anyone who's working with people is far more sort of prone to burnout or suffering from more extreme burnout at the moment, just because they've been like the emotional mops in their organisations, going around and sucking up everybody's emotions and then having nowhere to put that themselves. So I'm sure there's, a heap of other influences, but that's just some of them that can help you understand the perfect storm and normalise, if you're feeling absolutely exhausted and a bit despondent and not as engaged and feel like you're not functioning as you normally would, you're definitely not alone. And there's a lot of very good reasons why.
One thing you said there about, people, when you're looking at Zoom and you don't have those sort of other cues, you just have a face and you automatically assume the worst. That's really interesting, isn't it? Because when you're in the office and you're in a physical meeting, there's so many other things that you can take from people to understand, and then you have that social connectivity, that social connection, the social capital that you get within an office, where you can leave a meeting and then you're chatting to somebody in the cafe, and it doesn't go beyond what's what you might assume negatively on a Zoom meeting.
So you might have had a difference, maybe you've had a major difference, but then you're in the tea room and you have a cup of tea and laughing about what you did on the weekend. So it's like your way of like re-establishing connection and calming each other's brains down. So what can we do? We're many organizations are hybrid working, we're remote working. So many people don't want to go back into the office. Lots of organizations want to bring some people back into, there's this whole challenge and mix for organizations, employees going on. And, we've got introverts and extroverts and all of multiple things, and people's personal lives and work lives, and everything's blended. What are the tips? What can we do? If we're experiencing burnout, or we believe we are, or we're leaders and we are mops, as you're saying, what are the tips? What is Select talking to their people, your clients, around how can organizations help manage this new way of working? What are your tips for leaders? What are your tips for employees that might be feeling despondent? How do we change? Couple of things there. So you mentioned hybrid working. So the most recent studies coming out on that are saying hybrid working is actually more exhausting than remote working. Now, don't panic, because I actually think that this is similar to remote working. In the beginning, we were all like, oh my God, what is this? How do we do it? And we all got into our rhythms and worked out our routines. I actually think the same thing is going to happen with hybrid, but we're going to go through a bumpy any sort of transition, as Triiyo would very well know.
It's always bumpy.
It's always bumpy. So that's the hybrid working piece. And I think that comes back, whether it's, burnout or, remote working, dealing with the challenges of remote or hybrid working. A lot of it is about just reestablishing boundaries and routines that prioritize self-care. Because if you look at the definition of burnout, it's defined as a syndrome from exposure to chronic workplace stress that hasn't been adequately managed, that hasn't been successfully managed. So that's the piece I often stress. Is like, we can't control all that list of stuff that I just mentioned. A lot of that's out of our control. But what we can do is learn very little ways to manage ourselves and to manage our self-care intentionally. So, acknowledge that, you're probably a rare bird if you're not burnt out right now. It's very normal. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It doesn't mean that you're not a highly functioning, successful person. It means that you've actually lived through a really difficult time. So acknowledge that. Give yourself a bit of encouragement, let the people around you know, and then take really small steps. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself with working on your well-being. That's the last thing you want.
And then hit yourself with the shit you stick because you're not doing it good enough.
Exactly. Then you just go down the cycle of hopelessness. So really, you just want to pick, one thing to work on at a time and take very small steps towards it. So the most powerful things you can generally work on are something as simple as making sure every morning when you get up that you're exposed to 10 minutes of sunlight. Not through a glass window, not through your sunglasses, but there's something that happens when sunlight hits your pupils that it promotes really healthy melatonin and cortisol cycles. So when you're burnt out, basically you've been in fight or flight for a very long time. So you need a lot of repair around cortisol. So just that little, just starting with that little daily ritual. Then I always recommend, don't say, okay, I'm going to start to meditate. That's going to fix everything, or to meditate for half a day. There's no way a burnt out brain can sit and think about nothing. And all you're going to do is just sit there thinking about, how you should.
All the things that you're not meant to be thinking about. Why can't my brain just shut down?
Yeah. So let's be realistic. When I work with our clients, I get them doing 30-second mindfulness meditations, but during the day. Don't bookend your self-care. It's during your day at work that your cortisol is being sort of raised bit by bit by bit. If you wait to the end of the day, you're never going to get it down. And then you get that lovely cortisol wake up call at 2 a.m. and start thinking, and then it all starts again. So the one useful thing you can do with these Zoom virtual calls is you can use them as a trigger or a cue. So every time you finish a meeting or a Zoom call, think, okay, I'm going to do a 30-minute listen in. I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to listen for every layer of sound that I don't normally pick up. I'm just going to sit here and feel each and every one of my toes against my socks for 30 seconds. I'm going to look for every shade of green that I possibly can.
Yeah.
So it's just a good way of just connecting, grounding,
slowing down.
Yeah. And then you could alternate that with a really simple breathing practice. So any of your chosen breathing practices, I like the 6, 7, 8, where you go in through the nose for 6, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. You do 3 rounds of that. That has been proven to actually wash a little bit of cortisol out of your system. So you do that a few times during your day, and you do that consistently over a few weeks. You're going to start feeling calmer, less overwhelmed, and giving your poor brain a break.
What if we did, as sort of leaders, what if we instigated something like that breathing exercise at the beginning of every Zoom meeting? We're going to take 30 seconds, shut down your eyes, ground yourself, come into the present moment, and do that 6, 7, 8 breathing exercise 3 times. And now we're going to start the meeting.
I ask so many of my leaders to do that. Some of them do, some of them get a little bit embarrassed, but if you get enough people doing it, and it makes the biggest difference, if that's a gift you can give to your team, because often we don't give ourselves permission. We don't want to be perceived as lazy or, unwilling to help. Or so if you get a leader doing that on a work call, that is one of the most profound things you can do to re-energize your workforce. Another really easy thing you can do if you're feeling depleted during the day is just sit and reflect on one thing that you've done that you think you've done well, or a way that you've acted that you're proud of that day. So that releases a little bit of dopamine that buffers your adrenaline, that increases your adrenaline, and it helps you get through the day.
Do you know that gratitude exercise is actually something I used in the first lockdown? It was such a tough, that first one I found particularly hard. And I had a gratitude journal, and it took you, it had all of the prompts in there, but you had to wake up in the morning and say 3 things that you wanted to achieve in that day. And then at the end of the day, be thankful for 3 things that had happened. And some of them were just so basic, in terms of what I was thankful for. But it took me through a whole year. I did the whole year, and I just feel that it really just helped me stay centered, stay in the present moment, and look at the positives, because there was that, so much fear and negativity that it can be so overwhelming. But I agree, looking at what have I done well, what am I thankful for, sort of, and just trying to shift that mindset is actually really powerful.
To more of a positive bias than a negative bias. I would say if you are really burnt out right now, I wouldn't even go 3 things, just choose one thing. Sometimes people get overwhelmed at just, oh my God, I've got to think of 3 things. Just think of one thing. And if it's something that you think that you've done well, or that's a lot of people who are prone to burnout, it's because they're very harsh on themselves. They've got a very harsh self-critic. So it's doing sort of a double whammy. That action is you're experiencing gratitude, but you're also reflecting back something good about yourself and being kind to yourself, which very much helps with burnout.
So on that basis, then, I guess when we're looking at what self-care that we can do, instead of giving ourselves a list of 10 things we need to do every day, start with one. Because if we are sort of burnout, when you're sort of starting, like, say, like a diet program or something, like, I'm going to do all of these things, and then it lasts maybe 3 days. And you're
it's like a New Year's resolution, isn't it?
Yeah. Completely. So, so breathing would be one of them. 30 seconds of just mindfulness and quiet time.
Yeah, the ritual of in the morning, getting that sunlight on, you might have a tea at the same time. Anything sensory. So because burnt out brains get stuck in doing and thinking, what burnt out brains most need but are not doing is sensing. So by that, I mean, have a hot bath, dive in the cold ocean.
Yeah.
I do the 2-minute cold at the end of my shower, which is a little bit crazy, but it works. I
haven't got there yet.
But anything sensory, even patting your dog, anything. So when you do have time out and you feel exhausted, the temptation is to just flop on the couch, watch Netflix, eat junk food, have a glass of wine. I'm not going to tell you not to do that, but if you can just make sure you do 15 minutes of something that's sensory. And what I include in sensory is a really meaningful conversation with someone as well, where you're really present. Just doing that will gradually help. I
read that yesterday, actually. Picking up the phone and talking to somebody you love or somebody that you're close to is actually a really beautiful way just to disconnect and reconnect. It's a bit like going out in nature, isn't it? Having even if it's, raining at the moment, but, the cold air or the wind on your face or, the sand between your toes, it just takes you away from the mundane. And what about sort of creativity?
Oh, creativity, absolutely. Because when you're creative, you're in the positive part of your thinking brain. You're in that free roaming. But what you find is often burnt out people find it hard to be creative. If you want to test if you're burnt out, sit down and try and read. Well, you're never going to read a book, but try and read a reasonably long article. And if you're having troubles getting through that, odds are you're burnt out. So anything creative, listening to music, but don't get disappointed if you find something you normally would be really creative about, you're not, because a burnt out brain struggles even with that.
Yeah, music is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So could organizations, if they believe that they have a workforce suffering with high levels of burnout, could they create sort of team days which are specifically structured to being creative? We're going to take a morning off. We're going to do, even if it's just something online, but forcing sounds terrible, doesn't it? Encouraging everyone to switch off from work, get into that different part of the brain, would that have positive outcomes?
I think it would. I think it would definitely be better than the resilience workshop, put it that way. I'm not a fan of resilience workshops being offered to people who are burnt out. I think it's sort of but
I guess, and the other thing, if you're burnt out, often it's like, I don't have time. I mean, I don't have time to do this stuff. We're, often back to back in Zoom meetings. So we're literally going from one phase to another, boom, boom, boom. And there is no time in between each one to sort of take our time, take time out or to do something for ourselves or to reconnect. And I guess these are just the bad habits that we've fallen into because we're often working from home. I mean, back in the day, you would maybe walk to a client meeting and you'd have a face-to-face meeting. Then you'd have that period of walking back or taxis, whatever, to disconnect, reconnect, have that downtime and then get back into work. We don't have these sporadic times in the day where even if we're just commuting, that you have the time to go from work to home. It's just so blurred. So it's, I guess, finding boundaries or having boundaries and a toolkit that we can pick in and pull out what we need at the time and then having the wherewithal to know, actually, this is what I'm feeling. It's okay to be feeling like this, but what am I going to do about it?
What am I going to do about it? Rather than just collapse, what can I do that's going to be really beneficial? And just a 15-minute sensory good exercise with someone that you like, can make the world of difference. It's interesting what you were just saying about, the workplace offering, a day of creativity. I'm finding at the moment when workplaces do that, people are so overworked and understaffed that they almost panic at what they're going to come back to. So I almost feel like a workplace, it would be better if they sort of hired an extra person or said, while you're away, we're going to have this person to do your work, or, because I think people, when you're that overwhelmed, the prospect of taking half an hour to go even to a wellbeing workshop is too much.
Yeah. We're really pushing our people too hard if we're at that.
Yes.
That's a breaking point.
It is.
And if your people are at breaking point, your organisation is at breaking
point. It is, yeah. And then there's so many job options for people at the moment. And that's what we're finding. People are using resignation as their chosen self-care. And that's good. Often they're leaving actually quite good jobs, but it's
not good for the organisation, is it?
It's not at all. It's not at all.
Turnover is an extremely costly affair for an organisation. So really finding ways to look after your people better is far more cost effective and effective, and the right thing to do way of treating people and humans.
Yes, as I say, it's a return on humanity. Let's forget about return on investment and talk about return on humanity.
I love that. So before you go, let's just wrap up. When we wake up in the morning, get outside, look up at the sun. Let's forget about the concerns around sunlight. We're going to look up into the sky. We're going to get
10 minutes.
And that will help also help us sleep better at night. So it will readjust our circadian rhythms. Breathing exercises, don't put the pressure on to do a whole meditation, 30 minutes of 30 seconds breathing, 6, 7, 8, even that, but at intervals throughout the day.
Consistency is key.
Talking, find somebody that you love or that you love to talk to, and pick up the phone, get outside at other times in the day. I know people talk about barefoot and grounding, but actually just getting outside is going to be, getting some exercise is going to be super beneficial. Creativity, if we can get that in, and music. So anything else that makes us feel good and uplifted. And also what's the one good thing I've done today, or what am I proud of today?
So a little lunchtime reflection, or sometime, just really feeding your sense of self-worth and self-acceptance.
I love that. Thank you so much, Martine. I've loved talking to you. There's many, many more topics that I want to talk to you about. So we will definitely come back for part 2, 3, 4, 5 and onwards. But thank you so much for those tips. It's a really critical issue in the workplace at the moment, and I'm sure people will find these super helpful.
And I hope there's lots of bosses listening as well.
Yes, let's start the 6, 7, 8 at the beginning of every Zoom meeting and just help our people to readjust and recenter.
Great.
I love it. Thank you so much. We'll speak to you soon.
Bye.